Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. Welcome on in to your FreightWaves Now Community Spotlight. I'm Kaylee Nix here with Mary O'Connell, and we've got, of course, the best way to end your week with the coolest community in freight. Mary, thanks for being here.
Anytime, guys. Thanks for having me. You know, this is the number one spot to start your Friday. And if it's not, well, I'm starting that rumor so everyone can just spread it.
There you go. You got to listen, and then you got to join us on Friday mornings for this community update. And we are back once again with another familiar face. Richie Daigle from Tive is joining you to talk a little bit about what goes on with theft in the cold chain. And this is a space where I feel like we don't give it a lot of credence, right? We talk a lot about freight theft when it comes to electronics or when it comes to alcohol has weirdly been in the news a lot recently for theft, but actually we do see a pretty decent amount of theft in cold chain storage as well. That's where Tive comes in handy with their little tracking devices. It's not just for managing temperature and conditions, but also for figuring out where the heck your freight went. What are you guys focusing in today on this episode of Running on Ice?
So today we're kind of diving into, honestly, I like to dive into some of the weirder stuff that ends up as theft because, you know, that's how we found out one time that dog food, someone stole an entire trailer of dog food. And I was like, that's oddly specific and weird and difficult to unload. So I like to focus on some of that. But like you said, it is something that we don't think about that much because it's cold chain, like it's protected, it's fine. But actually there is a fair amount of theft, and turns out a lot of it comes down to how, like, the stuff that can get offloaded quickly. Like, I know for a while there's some drink that's like called Prime or something. I don't know. It's got the brightly colored labels in the store. That was a target for a while because it was in so much demand and people were looking everywhere for it. That those were a target because everybody wanted them and they were very easy to offload. So because you think about it, if you steal, a pallet or two or more's worth of beverages, that's a lot to unload. You have to put those somewhere. You can't just store like 12 pallets at your house.
Yeah, I think that it brings up an interesting point and an interesting piece that you guys actually talk about in the episode today, which I won't spoil it. And you can watch the episode to figure out what we're talking about. But for some of these things that do get stolen, there is that question of like, what do you do with the freight that you steal? Because I can't imagine that there is a ton of demand for things like, I stole a whole trailer load full of vegetables. What am I going to do with it, right?
Exactly. And that's where it's one of those where, like, you hear, okay, you stole a bunch of vegetables, you stole a bunch of like ice cream. Okay, well, like, you not only do you have to figure out where to put an entire trailer full of that product, with cold chain, you have to get it there in a certain time window. Like, it's not just like if you, for example, I would assume ice cream would be a horrible thing to steal, but I'm going to use it for this example. If you steal it, then you still have to find a way to put it where before it melts or before the reefer unit runs out of gas. So like, it's like, I have a lot of questions of why, but turns out when criminals steal things, they don't just like leave a little note of like, I stole this because of this. That would be very handy, but sadly, not how that world works. But that's where, those temperature monitors, those kind of location taggers really come in handy, because should someone unfortunately steal things, it's very handy to go to the police and say, hey, we have this crime, we have this exact amount was taken, but also it essentially has the equivalent of an Apple AirTag on it. So here's where it is if you want to go pick it up.
Yeah, we can bring it back home with that and bring it back to the conversation at hand, which is, of course, Tive and their technology and the role that technology plays in preventing freight theft. And as I mentioned at the start, Tive is known for their little tracking units, which just attach to whatever you need, whether that's a reefer trailer or it's a container on a container ship, whatever it is, they can make it and they can do that. And it is environmental monitoring, right? Temperature, humidity, things like that. But it also serves as a track and trace device. And when we're talking about this technology, was it always twofold together, or did we see kind of the evolution of the need for the track and trace at the same time as we did for the environmental monitoring?
I mean, it kind of makes sense in the grand scheme of cold chain of saying, hey, because track and trace has always been pretty easy to transfer over to cold chain. Like, your trailer is here, now it's here. that process is already very well defined. However, it's much harder when you add that temperature controlled aspect of it, because then you need something that can say, okay, I'm at this location and it's this temperature, this humidity, this range out here. Because as like we know, dry van, you just have to know where it is. It doesn't matter if a pair of jeans gets up to 100 degrees in the desert. They're still going to be jeans. They're still going to be good. It doesn't matter if they get too hot or if they get frozen. However, everything on the cold chain side, it's completely different. You do need that temperature at component. So it makes sense to have always had both. And also a lot of times with cold chain, like we see a lot with pharmaceuticals, that's a very expensive load. Because more often than not with pharmaceuticals, you're not going to fill up an entire truck with medicine, because it'll max out on the insurance before it'll max out on weight. So that's where a lot of those cold chains are, they're a little bit more expensive. So you do want that higher investment in knowing that your product is safe and monitored, and, it'll be okay.
So, do you think that we ever get to a point where we see these types of technologies being put just on like a unit as a whole, like a whole entire trailer, versus on like a load specific, like a piece of freight versus a piece of freight versus a piece of freight?
I think there could be a case made for, honestly being able to put it on the whole trailer unit is 100% wonderful. But I think there could be a case made for kind of that individual pallet type thing, especially if you have different, especially if you potentially have it where it's getting loaded with another shipment. So if you have two shipments on one truck, I think there's a great case for that, because then if you know that it was at a certain temperature and then you stop at this second location, then it kind of says, okay, well, because of this second location, potentially my stuff fell out of temperature and my goods are no longer usable. So I think that's a very strong case for it. I would love to see it kind of built into, and we're starting to see it a little bit, where it's built into some of these reusable, sustainable totes and other packaging that people are adapting and using. So I would love to see it grow there, where, if I have this box that I can ship all of my stuff in, and then all I have to do is charge it up and my tracker is good to go again. So I would love to see it. I would love to see it integrated, something like this integrated more in those reusable solutions.
Well, and the solution also has a sustainability component when we talk about reducing emissions by not having to run either your generator or your reefer unit to keep items cold when they are as cold as they need to be, right? Is that something that we're looking at seeing coming down the line too? It's not just hey, we know that this is cold, it's operating at 0, we only need it at 32. We can say, okay, if it's there, we can leave it there and just maintain instead of keeping it precautionarily way over cold.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of cool stuff happening in the reefer fuel space, if you want to say reefer fuel. Basically, there's a lot of different alternative fuels, because it's so much easier to kind of utilize an alternative fuel for a reefer unit versus an entire truck. Because if you think about it, a reefer unit just has to kind of work like your home air conditioning, keep everything at the temperature that it's supposed to be at, that the temperature's set, and it's on a much smaller unit, versus an alternative fuel for a truck or a engine. That's where things get a lot trickier. So there are a lot of really cool alternative fuels and electric options that are coming out. And so I think we're going to see a lot of sustainability improvements there that are in turn going to carry on through down even to the packaging that is used. Because if any way to have to use less energy to keep products in a more sustainable, or basically any amount of energy reduction, would be fantastic, if as long as products are still maintained at the same temperature and there's no degradation of quality there.
There you go. And I'm sure as these technologies continue to emerge, we'll be right here to talk about them. Mary, thanks for joining us this morning for Running on Ice. Of course, we will catch the show later on this afternoon, and subscribe to that newsletter if you haven't already. Mary, we will see you next week.
Bye, guys.